rustle of grass, the clatter of hoofs, the whistle of string, and the whiff of a step wind that fell into a hollow stem. All these sounds that surrounded our ancestors. Listening, people learned to play them, inventing a variety of musical instruments. Mobile, lightweight, and convenient for nomadic life. It's a project about musical instruments created by the great nomadic civilization. Music is the soul of the people. It sounds like eternity between the strings, pulsates with a membrane of tambourines, and sings with the gray-haired voice of the steppe flutes. For centuries, our ancestors created these musical instruments, listening to the sounds of their native land. Today, these are the values and important meanings of the past. This is a heritage that must be guarded and constantly broadcast in order to preserve the cultural gene pool of the nation. Museum of Folk Musical Instruments, named after Ykhlas, this is a unique institution throughout Central Asia. After all, this is not just a large-scale exhibition. For almost 40 years, the museum has also been a research center where they study musical artifacts, restore and recreate ancient instruments. The museum was organized in 1980 in accordance with a decree of the Council of Ministers of the Kazakh SSR. Initially, a collection of almost 500 exhibits was located in a historic two-story building, the former home of aksakal Seydalin. Due to the fact that the exposition was rapidly expanding, 3 years later, the museum moved to another building. By the way, this building is an important architectural monument of Verninsky architecture.
The
building of this museum has Republican value. It is considered a unique architectural monument of history and culture. The building was built in 1908 according to the project of architect Andrei Zenkov and is made in a roped style, that is, with elements of ancient Russian architecture. Initially, the cathedral was used as an officer club, then as the Verna Council of Workers, Soldiers, and Peasants Deputies. Later, there was a post office, a cinema Red Star, and a club of the Cavalry Regiment. Today, the museum bears the name of the Kazakh folk composer, kui player, and kobis player Ykhlas Dukenula. And therefore, the entrance to the wooden building is decorated with a stone sculpture, a copy of the Kazakh musical instrument of narkobis. The museum has 7 halls that introduce visitors to the national musical instruments of the Kazakh people and more than 40 countries of the world. In the first hall, you can familiarize yourself with the classification of instruments and see exhibits with more than 10 centuries of history found during archaeological excavations. It is hard to believe that some artifacts in this room are over 1,000 years old. In general, musical archaeology is a fairly young science in Kazakhstan. Despite its name, this section relates more to art history than to archaeology. Indeed, during excavations, scientists find many household items, weapons, jewelry, and instruments. Only highly specialized professionals can identify musical ones among them. Thanks to their work, the museum's foundation is enriched with new rare exhibits.
Археолог өзі музыкалық аспап табам деп, яғни үміттенбейді негізі.
Of course, the archaeologist does not go to the excavations in order to find a musical instrument. After all, no one knows what will be discovered underground, and it is very difficult to distinguish by eyes the ancient remains and understand which of them was a musical instrument. But our scientists constantly delight us with finds. Most often, instruments are found in the south and east of the country. It was in these regions that the large nodes of ancient nomadic civilization were located, such cities as Taraz and Otrar, where the famous Sasternai was found, later revived by the scientist Bolat Sarbayev, and today occupying its place among popular folk instruments. Such findings are of great importance not only for the musical sphere, but also for history as a whole. These findings indicate a high level of cultural development of the population of that era. So they had the art of music, spiritual development. The musical instruments found during excavations speak of all this. All of them were found at burials and in ancient nomad settlements, and who are the nomads of the 9th, 8th centuries. These, of course, are Kipchak tribes. From these findings, it can be judged that they occupied large territories in Eurasia and had a developed civilization. By the found musical instruments, it is possible to determine whether the Kipchaks, Kemaks, or other Turkic tribes lived in this area. One of the most ancient exhibits of the museum is not musical instruments, but their images. Stones with petroglyphs and balbals brought from Almaty region date back to the Bronze Age. If you look at these petroglyphs, an image of an instrument similar to a Dombra immediately catches your eye. We know that it existed in the 5th, 6th centuries, and these images speak of more ancient periods. Now let's move on to other petroglyphs. It depicts everyday scenes, and if you take a closer look, you can notice this image. Here a man holds in his hands an instrument similar to a pipe, sibizga. Touching antiquity in a literal sense, because the stones are not fenced, you can go to the next room. Here is a collection of wind and percussion instruments, among which are the very old, almost extinct species, Jelboas, Kernay, Dudaga. The next hall has the richest exposition. Here is the queen of Kazakh music, Dombra. In this room, you can get acquainted with different types and forms of this instrument, hear how different schools of Kazakhstan Dombra music sound, and personally see the instruments of great musicians and composers. The fund of our museum contains over 1,200 musical instruments, and more than 70 of them are memorial ones. These are personal instruments of the great personalities of the 19th century, which is called the Golden Age in Kazakh culture. In particular, we store musical instruments of Mahambet and Kurmangazi, Birjan Sal and Abaykunan Bayole, Yestai, Akan Sire. Among memorial instruments, Kobiz also takes its place. The museum has a whole hall dedicated to this instrument. The oldest exhibit dates back to the 16th century. It belonged to the famous, at that time Bakse, a shaman named Jaras. The task of a museum is to find out the history of everything that people who are not indifferent to art wish to perpetuate in the museum.
Жалпы музейге қандай да бір экспонат түссе, оны міндетті түрде біз зерттеуден өткіземіз. Ең алдымен осы музейге өткізіп тұрған адаммен сұхбат.
When any exhibit enters the museum, we will definitely conduct research. The first thing we talk with the person who brought it. We ask about the history of the instrument. Where did it come from? What is its value? Who used it? At what time? In which region? How and by whom the instrument was made? That is, we receive from the person the maximum possible information in order to rely on them in further studies. After that, the instrument is measured, the materials of which it is made are determined, details and features are identified, and carefully recorded. As a result of such painstaking work, museum staff may have an idea of the similarities and differences in the instruments of a particular era. All this information is of great value to art historians and historians who work closely with the museum. Most of the museum exhibits are made of wood and leather. The materials are quite fragile and short-lived. Therefore, each instrument is carefully stored in a display case with a specific temperature and light conditions. These indicators in the museum are checked every morning, because the artifacts are the real cultural heritage of the people. Many of them are already in a damaged form, so it cannot do without restoration. So the museum collaborates with professional craftsmen, who put in order old instruments and are engaged in reconstruction of archaeological finds. Often they give us old family instruments. They're damaged. People do not know what to do with them and bring us. This Dombra was also brought this way. I'm now restoring it, doing the neck again. I want to try to bring the Dombra to its original form to align it. This is an instrument of the 27th year. It is written on the case. Perhaps the inscription was originally made in Arabic script. Then the deck broke. And apparently, in order not to lose the inscription, it was withdrawn again in Cyrillic alphabet, so that the memory would not be erased. And for the masters and for the museum staff, it is important that the instruments not only stand on display, but make sound. This is an important feature of the Kazakhstan Museum from the very beginning of its existence. Then the Deputy Minister of Culture, Uzbek Ali Janibekov, with whose direct participation this museum was created, gathered a small ensemble of gifted employees within its walls. The ensemble members are the museum staff. Its first leader was the famous musician Zharkan Shakarimov. The main goal of the ensemble was to give visitors the opportunity to hear how these valuable artifacts, our folk instruments, sound. It was a time of active research and the return to life of forgotten folk instruments. Therefore, the ensemble created in the museum was supposed to play Old Jet again, Sasernai, Sibizga, and Sherter, which were still unusual for anyone at that time. The name of the collective, Sazgen, also had a symbolic meaning. Saz in all Turkic languages means melody, and Ken is a place, so the name means a place of music. Then, according to the laws of Singarmonism, the letter K in the word Ken turned into the letter G, and the word Sazgen turned out. The ensemble formed immediately after the opening of the museum performed here, right in the halls with exhibits. At first it was perceived as an interactive part of the exposition, but a large ensemble with several folklore instruments was waiting for a big fate. In 1988, Sazgen received a rebirth when Samat Malimbay, a young musician, a graduate of the conservatory, became its head. I remember, it was April 4, 1988. I was brought to this museum. The ensemble was shown. We arrived at 4 o'clock. The concert was held. We watched, and after the concert, they left me here with the words, "Meet, this is Samat, the conductor. Now he will be the leader of the ensemble." That's how we stayed with the team, and they were no less surprised than me. Then I began to work, brought the score, sheet music. And then they say to me, "Samat, we are not used to this. We don't even know the notes. In general, We're the scientific staff of this museum. This is our main work. We won't be performers. We will fulfill our immediate responsibilities. You don't be offended. After that, they simply left the ensemble. The museum management made decisions. It was decided to recruit professional musicians and gradually take the ensemble outside the museum hall. Samad began to search for musicians. But here, not everything turned out smoothly. Folklore instruments have just returned from oblivion, and there are few professionals who can play them. They had to improvise. I invited Nurgul Jakabek. She was the first member to the renewed staff of Sazgan. She graduated from a college of music in the class of Prima Kobus in Aktobe. I met with her and told that I was looking for musicians to invite them to the ensemble, and invited her to work. She asked what instrument she will play on. I say, there is such a Zhetigan instrument. I want you to play it. She was afraid that she could not, but most importantly, she agreed to participate, and I started to train her. I remember that I brought Zhetigan to the house of Nurgul, and she says, "What kind of box is this?" I answered, "This is not a box, this is Zhetigan, and you must master it."
There
was also such a wonderful musician, Jahangir Telkojaev. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. He was a multi-instrumentalist, founder of the Otarar Sazı Orchestra. Hearing that I was collecting a new composition for Sazgan, he came himself. Of course, I was delighted. He was such a professional. Jahangir said that he had learned to make an instrument. It is now called Saz Sernay. That was just great news. I immediately decided to include, but I set the condition, to master the instrument Sibizga. He agreed. Sibizga is usually made of reed, and he took an ordinary sewer pipe, drilled holes in it according to the Sibizga pattern, and began to blow. So he mastered the instrument in a month, and I immediately wrote a topic for him. In the same way, other musicians mastered the new old instruments. Among them was Zamzagul Izmuratova, a graduate of the conservatory, and now a teacher in the Sherter class. At that time, musicologists and masters had not yet dealt closely with this instrument, so the young member of the ensemble had to play at the museum exhibit.
Бірінші Sazgan ансамбліне келгенде мына аспапты бізге көрсетті. Осы аспапты көріп, әрине аспаптың құлақ бұрауы келмейді.
When I just joined the ensemble, they showed me this instrument. Of course, this is not a full-fledged concert Sherter. It is difficult to tune. It is an old instrument. But nevertheless, I played it. I remember the first work that I performed was Karator Gai by Akan Seri. It was very inconvenient to play such an instrument. Then of course, we tried to improve it, change the strings. Later they brought me this Sherter, a more modern version. I also played on it for a while.
Мына Sherter аспабымен ойнай бастадым.
Сөйтіп жарты жылдың ішінде Sazgan ансамблінің Америка.
That's how we worked. And 6 months later, the Sazgan ensemble went on their first foreign tour. It was the United States of America. There in 1988, from October 26 to November 7, they were the days of the Soviet Union, and we represented our country. Since then, the Sazgan ensemble has become positioned as a professional instrumental group. In the same 1988, it transferred from the Museum of Folk Instruments to the Regional Philharmonic Society. Another test was waiting for the popular ensemble already in the new millennium. In 2001, Almaty was given the status of a city of Republican significance, and neighboring Taldykurgan became the center of the Almaty region. Accordingly, the Regional Philharmonic Society moved to another city. However, not all musicians wanted to change their place of residence. The ensemble team Sazgan remained in Almaty. almost in full force. At that time, the head of the ensemble was Bagdat Legenov.
Ары ойланып, бері ойланып, жігіттердің басын тағы да қосып, шашыратпай, жеке шектеулі серіктестік ашып, оның атын сазген сазы қойып, сөйтіп...
We thought for a long time how to solve this problem. We decided not to leave, but to register the LLP called the Sazgen Saze Ensemble and continued to work. We worked in this mode for 2 years, but it was difficult because it was very difficult for the folklore group in market conditions to provide for themselves. As a result, 2 years later we wrote to the Almaty city Akimat with a proposal to transfer us under the control of the city. The proposal was approved. Since then, Sazgen Saze, a city ensemble with its own new history.
Репертуар, как бы вам сказать, очень огромен репертуар, начиная с фольклорных произведений, которые еще очень древние.
The repertoire is very huge, starting with folklore works, which are still very ancient works, were performed on ancient folk instruments, and ending with modern classics and modern pop music even. We have a work of parade of instruments. You can tell about it separately. There we show about 17, 18 instruments. They come out, and each shows its sound.
Они выходят, и каждый показывает свое звучание.
In the meantime, the collective who moved to Talıkurgan retained the original name and received a new composition from those local musicians and those who decided to move to the regional center. The head was the honored artist of Kazakhstan, Tursunkan Korkuzhaeva.
За 17 лет ансамбль достиг очень высоких творческих высот.
For 17 years, the ensemble has reached very high creative heights. Because we are international contestants and Republican contestants, laureates over the years, there have been a lot of trips. At the invitation of the UN, Olja Süleymanov at that time invited us. We were in Paris, in China, in many countries.
Во многих странах.
This team encourages the creative freedom of the participants. Musicians not only perform works, but also write them themselves. I usually write when my mood is good. For example, now in the ensemble, we're performing my work entitled Inspiration. We're performing this kui.
сияқты мына күйлер бұл қазіргі уақытта осы ансамбльмен қарастырып.
We compose most often for Dombra. Then we write parts for all the instruments that are used in our ensemble.
Домбраға жазылады, одан екі домбраға жазылады. Одан кейін сол жаңағы екі дауыстағы жазылған домбра сол ансамбльге бөлінеді.
These two groups today are independent ensembles. Each of them occupies its own place in the Kazakh instrumental art. But their roots are common and they are laid in the Museum of Folk Musical Instruments named after Ykhlas. Born in this unique place, today these ensembles represent Kazakh culture around the world. So ancient musical instruments of the great steppe today sound on stage in various countries.